Hi, everybody. Bernstein here with one of our boxing hangouts. And on tonight's show, I am so delighted because we're going to get to talk about a wide range of issues in boxing and even one in mixed martial arts, which is really fascinating, with one of the very best boxing writers, not just now, but ever. He's informational. He is, when he does give his opinions, which isn't all the time, they're very well thought out and excellent, and he is read by millions of folks on Yahoo Sports. My good friend Kevin Iole. Kevin, thank you for taking time to visit with us. You're in the midst of a fascinating 2 weeks in which you are actually on jury duty in a very, very intense trial. So here you are taking time out for us, and I appreciate it.
We talk boxing at night instead of during the day. Nothing better.
Exactly, yeah. Hey, listen, a couple things to talk about. One is a story that you wrote that I thought was really interesting and really right on about Vladimir Klitschko and a fight that really kind of I think, validated him, and that may have even been the word you used in the story. When he fought Samuel Peter, back when Samuel Peter was a force to be reckoned with in the heavyweight division and hurt Vladimir Klitschko badly, he won that fight, and in your story you talk about how that fight kind of changed him, didn't it?
I really think it did, you know, and let me give the genesis of that story, Al, because I think it's, you know, I've written hundreds of stories on Vladimir Klitschko since 1996, since he won the gold medal and turned professional. And so, you know, he's dominating these guys. He's winning, you know, 10 rounds to 2, 11 rounds to 1, or he's knocking them out. Yeah. I said, what do I write different? You know, I know the week of the fight, Tyson Fury is going to have a lot to say, and it's going to be an interesting. But, you know, I'm a month out from the fight, and I need to, you know, get a bigger overview picture. And I started thinking, I said, you know what? He fought Samuel Peter roughly 10 years ago. I said, let me check that date, because that could be a, you know, a story. Yeah. And I looked, the date is coming up, and it was 10 years. It was perfect. So there was the anniversary. I remember that fight so well because I thought it was a turning point in Vlad's career, where, you know, he had the loss to Corey Sanders in 2002. Right. Then he lost his conditioning against Layman Brewster in 2004, lost his title in that fight. And if you remember, the fight with DeVarrell Williamson outdoors at Caesar's Palace here in Las Vegas, you know, he was very shaky in that. He knocked DeVarrell out. Certainly did not look good. And there was a sense that Vladimir was sort of just a China chin, fragile guy. And the night of that Sam Peter fight, I think, really turned it around and put him on a different path.
It did. Sam Peter hurt him. And I remember doing the Williamson fight. I think we had that on Showtime. And you're right. We had this. We knew that Vladimir Klitschko was still a work in progress even at that point. We knew that he could be hurt. And yet we knew that he was getting better and better at fighting tall, adopting this Yamina Stewart style, and being more like Lennox Lewis. And that fight was, I thought it was great that you chose that fight to talk about it now, and the idea that it's the anniversary, because it was a turning point for him. And you made the point in the article, we're kind of used to, as you said here, we're used to this idea of him just dominating, and not so much of him being threatened by a fighter. Well, on October 24th, he's going to be facing Tyson Fury. Now, I am one of the very few, probably American boxing folk who has had a kind of a high opinion of Tyson Fury. I say kind of because we know that there's several different kinds of Tyson Fury that can show up. But I have always felt that Tyson Fury, in this era of heavyweights, can be a very dangerous heavyweight and has the potential to be a very good heavyweight. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to be Klitschko, but we know one thing. He will inject a lot of interest into this fight, and if we wondered about that, there is the press conference that just got held in which Tyson Fury showed up in a Batman costume And I think, in a way, pulled it off. He was kind of fun and goofy and charming doing it.
Well, you know, and I think he has the potential to do one thing: get inside of Vladimir's head, because you know, that's the thing. You know, Vladimir's been on cruise control here recently, just blowing guys out. Really hasn't had. Now all of a sudden he's going to have a guy in his face, talking to him, yakking at him, and you know, you think that's got to have some kind of effect on Vladimir. You know, and Vladimir, you know, is kind of a guy with decorum and everything like that. And you know, Tyson Fury's going to throw all that out the window. And does he get Vlad to abandon his game plan and maybe fight a little differently? Say, hey, I'll show you. And you, as you know, Al, from being in the sport so long, once you get sidetracked from your game plan and you go to try to prove a point, is when you're most vulnerable. And you know, he's a big guy, 6'9". He can hit. You know, I question his chin, but certainly, you know, you go. You know, when you're going up against Vladimir Klitschko, you know, you have to always feel like, hey, if I can hit him on the chin, I've got a chance.
Right. And you know, the interesting thing is, I would think Tyson Fury, who's been down a couple times in his career, he may get hurt. He may go down in the early rounds. If he gets up, his height and his length and his jab, it could make it an interesting fight against Klitschko. And they're going to have, it's a packed house for that fight, of course. They're going to do very big pay-per-view numbers in Europe. And so it's part of how the heavyweight division has kind of gotten a spark and a renewed interest. In my opinion, as we all, while certainly Deontay Wilder is a name here in the United States, I have to be honest with you, Kevin, and I don't know how you feel about it. I'm kind of waiting for the day when Anthony Joshua is ready to challenge for a heavyweight title. It's very, you know, risky to get on the bandwagon with young heavyweights, because look at a David Price, look at people like that. They can get hit on the shin and go away. But boy, Anthony Joshua looks good to me.
I said it last week. I was doing an interview, and somebody asked me, I said, oh, Deontay Wilder is the next big thing. And I said, well, I like Deontay Wilder, and he could be good for boxing, but he's 32 years old, and he still seems to be fighting these B and C level guys. Anthony Joshua, to me, is a guy that has a chance. I mean, he's, you know, coming off the Olympics. You know, he's a big guy. I think he's 16-0 with 16 knockouts. Clearly can punch. You know, clearly he's a good athlete, and I think they're moving him well, and they're handling him right. You know, there's a few guys out there now. I think the heavyweight division is starting to turn. You know, you referenced Tyson Fury in this era of heavyweights, and I agree. You know, that some of the guys that Vladimir's been facing, and he's been facing the mandatories, are just
everybody can.
Right. You know, he's beat everybody else. These guys are awful. Tyson, I think, deserves his chance, and he's kind of the bellwether of that group of guys. But coming behind, you know, you have Anthony Joshua, you have Joseph Parker, you know, and I questioned even a year ago, I thought, hey, Joe Parker might be good, but more no than yes. But now I think, you know, I'm starting to see him, and I think, you know, he might be something. So there's a few guys out there that I think could be factors going forward. And so, you know, maybe the heavyweight division, you know, it's never going to be as deep as we are at featherweight or at lightweight. But maybe we're starting to get some guys, and Joshua and Joe Parker, two at the top of the list.
Well, the heavyweight division has life again, which we're excited about. The lower weight divisions you talked about have produced some many great fights in the last several years. And anywhere from 140 up to 154, there's all kinds of matches that can be made, would be made, could be made. And one of the people that finds himself in that mix, though, is at I think a kind of a turning point, maybe a crisis point in his career, is the ever lovely Adrien Broner, who will be back in action in his fight against Furtive, Habib Furtive, on October 3rd, in a fight in which he'll be fighting for a vacant 140-pound title. But more importantly, here he is back down at 140 now, Broner, trying to see if he can recapture some of the magic he had at 135. Since he moved up from 135, he's 5-2 as a fighter, and one of those wins was the very close and controversial win over Paulie Malignaggi. So this fight against a good fighter in Alex Furtive, who's only had the one loss to Jesse Vargas, which some people thought he won, this could be a pivotal fight for Broner.
You know, Broner is, in my mind, clearly the more talented guy out. Clearly the more talented guy. But Broner is the least professional top talent fighter I've ever seen in my life.
That's probably true. It's not an overstatement, is it?
No, and he doesn't train, he doesn't come to fight, he doesn't work on his skills, and you know, and he's crude, and you know, all that stuff. He thinks he's funny promoting, and I can put that aside if the guy's a hard worker. Say what you want about Floyd. You know, and some people have different opinions about Floyd. You know, I happen to like Floyd. You know, I don't like everything he's done, but you know what? Floyd is a pro. Came to every fight in the best possible shape. He got better. He worked on his skills all the time. You know, Broner doesn't do that, and I think, you know, I think it's a mockery of the sport that he's actually getting a title fight. And I wrote a column on Yahoo Sports about that. And you know, you want to bring him back, put him in a fight you think he can win, go ahead. I have no problem with that. You want to put him on TV, but what are you saying to people in the sport? Here's a guy that on a nationally televised big fight doesn't train, puts forth very little effort in the fight against Sean Porter, loses the fight. When he fights hard in the 12th round, when he knows he's about to lose, he knocks Porter down and looks very good. And then he loses that fight, says, "Oh, screw it," is rude to a bunch of fans. And then if he turns around and he gets a title fight. What does that say to other people? What incentive do other people have to work hard? I don't get that. And, you know, to me, that is just a huge mistake.
Yeah, and Alec Furtive, it's interesting, who I mentioned this, he was a former champion at 140, and he's a B-level fighter, but a good B-level fighter. And the interesting thing about this fight is going to be if he can be busy, if Khabib can be busy in this fight, we're going to see it's going to be very interesting. Broner, who's fighting in his hometown, it's going to be interesting how Broner handles the busyness, because he's never busy and he doesn't really throw enough punches. Would you agree this is a watershed fight here for Broner? A bad performance here going to be very difficult for him to come back from.
I think, you know, fighting at home, this is a setup fight for him.
Yeah, if he doesn't win this one,
he's got everything going for him. He's fighting at home. He's fighting a guy that's slower than he is. You know, he's fighting a guy that has a little bit of a name, but certainly he's not. You know, you called him a B-level fighter, and I think that's fair. And, you know, so I think Broner has to go out there and perform. You know, and if he does what he did against Sean Porter, even John Molina, you know, he didn't go out there and, you know, that was a really disappointing fight against John Molina too, you know, where I felt like Broner is so much more talented than this guy, and I thought Molina would make him fight and Broner would look good, and it was just a wall, not a very good fight. You know, there's a lot of pressure on Broner, and he has to step up, and I don't know if he has it up here. I don't know if he understands it. You know, I really don't get it. He has the physical talent. God bless this guy with great physical talent, but he doesn't have the mind to go with it.
No, it's a good point. Now, that same night, also for another 140-pound title, which leads me to the great line from Ray Mancini when he once said, when Harry Arroyo won a championship and he lived in Youngstown, the same town as Ray Mancini, Ray said, "How many worlds are there?" So here we have two men on the same night fighting for world title. Lucas Matthysse, always entertaining to watch, fighting Victor Postal, who's, I think, a pretty good fighter. And what makes that match interesting to me, among other things, is Lucas Matthysse has had a long and winding road to get a world title and had his chance against Danny Garcia in what was a very good fight. It didn't get to the home stretch on that to win, and now he's fighting Postal. And I think this is a little bit of a trap fight for Lucas Matthysse. Because I like him. I think he's a terrific fighter. But here's a guy that people don't know that much about and think he's supposed to beat, but yet a guy that's never lost and a guy that has skills.
Yeah, you know, Postal fought really good fight on a Marquez card. Yeah, and so and he was he showed himself to be an elite guy that can be a good fighter. And Matthysse had that fight earlier this year against Provodnikov. Everybody saw that. It was a very hype fight. A lot of people were anxious to see that. And, you know, he comes off that fight, and it's easy for him to say, hey, I got, you know, maybe a rematch against Danny Garcia, something else, and, you know, kind of set his sights beyond Postal. And if he does, that's a mistake. You know, but I think the kind of fighter, you know, kind of contrary to Adrien Broner, the kind of career that Matthysse has, it shows, you know, and he works for what he gets. And so I think that's the kind of guy you can rely on night in and night out to be able to be there and get his best. And when he fights somebody that maybe is a little fleet of foot and has fast hands and slick boxer, he might have some trouble. Postal's going to be there with him, and kind of like in that Provodnikov fight, standing in a pocket and banging. And I, maybe not as much as Lucas, but I think he's going to be there. So I think that's the kind of fight that Lucas will do good in.
Yeah, I agree. Could be fun too. Now, there's a fight in Madison Square Garden on October 17th. I want to talk to you about the dynamics of this fight outside the ring, even though I think it's going to be, for however long it lasts, it's going to be very exciting inside the ring. But here's what fascinates me about the Gennady Golovkin-David Lemieux fight. David Lemieux is a good fighter who's very exciting and fun to watch, who's kind of coming into his own again after a couple of losses. And you and I know, because we cover the sport, that David Lemieux is always worth watching, fun to watch. We applaud him for taking this match at this point after winning a version of the middleweight title and not running away from Golovkin. But the interesting thing is the world at large, the casual fan, doesn't really know David Lemieux. And yet, this fight sold out Madison Square Garden in no time. It is getting more buzz, in my opinion, than I would have maybe expected it to. Is this a testimony to Gennady Golovkin's stardom starting to pay off? Is that a big part of this?
Well, I think Golovkin is a huge, 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 huge star among the hardcore fan base.
Yeah,
which is very small comparative to the overall, big fan base. So, you have to keep that in. I love Golovkin. I think he's a great fighter. I think he's a great talent, a great guy to watch. But having said that, I don't think that he has that overall mass appeal. Remember, the tickets prices were very low for this. I think Golovkin, when he gets a chance at that big fight, is going to burst into the superstardom. He's not there yet. But I think what you're seeing is this is a fight that the hardcore fans are so excited about, kind of like the Matthysse-Provodnikov fight earlier this year, where people just couldn't wait for that fight to happen, and they talked it up, and it did a great rating on two guys who couldn't speak English fighting on HBO in Verona, New York, did this massive rating, and I think because of the hardcore fans were just so engaged in. And I think that's what the Golovkin-Lemieux fight does, Al. I think the fight does around 200,000 on pay-per-view, which would be a solid number. I know it would be a solid number. The gate isn't as high, so that, when you look at, like, say, a Mayweather fight, he does a $8 and $12 million gate, or if he's fighting a star, like Pacquiao or Canelo, he's 20 million or higher. This gate is not going to be anywhere near that, and that tells you kind of the relative interest in the fight. But I think it's one of those where the hardcores love him because he just comes to fight. He's a pure fighter, and I think that this is kind of a good kicking off point for him in his career.
I've always felt that promoters have, in many cases, have made a mistake in scaling tickets too high. And I think this is the poster child for saying, I want to sell out a building. And they didn't make them ridiculously low, but they made them affordable.
They did.
It's better to put 17,000 people in Madison Square Garden and be able to say that fight sold out in 2 seconds than hold out for an extra 80,000 in the gate and not do it.
Well, I want to give Tom Loeffler a lot of credit here with the way, since 2012, since Golovkin started fighting on HBO, fighting in North America, give Tom Loeffler a lot of credit. He's done a couple of things. He's moved him around, showed him on the West Coast, built up a fan base. He had him on the East Coast, fought a couple times in New York and New England and Connecticut. People got to see him. He made a point of, hey, we're going to go after the belts, and if we can't get the guys we want to fight us, we're going to go after the belts and make the champions come to us. And hey, we're willing to fight guys. And Loeffler's done a really good job for Gennady, positioning him, picking the right fights, keeping him busy, putting him in the right spot. And I think what you talked about, Al, is 100% right. He priced the tickets right. He wanted people in that building. And if you pay that night, they're going to have Chocolatito Gonzalez on that undercard, which is, to me, he's the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world now that Floyd Mayweather's gone. You're going to have Golovkin and Lemieux, which is going to be an entertaining fight. There's going to be a lot of people screaming. And if you happen to tune in and see that, that's going to be something you're going to say, I got to learn more about this guy. And that's going to go push him into those bigger fights against an Andre Ward, we hope, and those kind of people.
Yeah, they need to get him into that kind of fight, and I think boxing wants to see it. And God bless David Lemieux. I hope that if he loses to Gennady Golovkin, which is certainly possible because Golovkin going the favorite, I think it will be exciting however long it lasts. You cover MMA, and we're going to get to that in a second. If somebody puts up a valiant fight and they're willing to take tough fights, in the world of MMA, they are not penalized for that. I pray, and I don't pray very often, I pray that that is the case with David Lemieux if he loses this fight, because he deserves to continue on in boxing. He's a very exciting fighter.
That has been my point in boxing for so long. I've written that so many times, Al, that, hey, reward fighters who fight hard, reward fighters who entertain the fans, reward fighters who take risks, and take guys like Adrien Broner and get rid of them. And, that's, to me, you're so right. If David Lemieux comes out and fights and Golovkin knocks him out in 4 or 5 rounds, but David Lemieux makes it a fight for those 4 or 5 rounds and gives the fans what they paid to see, a fight, then reward him.
I agree, yeah. I talked about the world of mixed martial arts, which you cover expertly, and I like to watch MMA, and I'm a fan of it, but, and occasionally I get to dabble in announcing an MMA fight here and there. One of the interesting stories that was, to me, kind of strange, and you chronicled it very, very well, was the recent suspension of NICK DIAZ, who, of course, for fans that are maybe boxing fans who don't know Nick, he's a very controversial, a good MMA fighter who I announced a couple of his fights back when he was with Strike Force and with Elite XC. Yeah, and then he got to with UFC. He tested positive for marijuana after a fight, correct?
Right.
He was suspended for 5 years and got a hefty fine, which for him at age 32, as you pointed out in your article about this, was like giving him a lifelong suspension. Right. Now, another fighter, Anderson Silva, was suspended for 1 year, I believe, right, for using performance-enhancing drugs. Right. You very well chronicled this story, and it struck me, as you said it, as kind of an abuse of power by the commission. Did some of that come simply from the fact that NICK DIAZ, who pushes the envelope and isn't the most easily likable guy on the planet, is that part of what led to this?
I think it is. Basically Nick has thumbed his nose at authority. That's why he's so popular to a certain degree, is because he thumbs his nose at authority all the time, and he's himself no matter what. But, Dana White has always said you got to play in the rules like that much, and Nick doesn't even play within the rules that much. I think he got, Pat Lundvall, Francisco Aguilar, Anthony Marnell, members of the Nevada Athletic Commission. He just really irritated. But the longer tenured members, in particular, Skip Apicino has been the chairman forever. And, this was his 3rd time with a failed test. So,
marijuana.
And he's done it before, and he's had paperwork issues, and also he's had repeatedly had the same issues. So I think, hey, they were mad, and they were out there. But my problem was on a number of levels. But here's the one: this was not a criminal proceeding, and so they did not have to find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
But I think I was saying, if I was sitting on a jury and I listened to that evidence, I'm not sure that I would call that a positive test, because his attorney, Lucas Middlebrook, did a terrific job, Al, in showing that perhaps the test result that showed he was high was invalid. And the state really didn't do a very good job of countering it and saying, here's why we think this test result. Basically, he passed the test at about 7 p.m. just before he went out to fight. Then he was tested again at about 10:30 after he fought, and that was the test that was positive. And then he comes back at 11:50, just before midnight, and he takes one more test, and that was negative. And the 7 o'clock test and the test just before midnight were almost identical in their in the numbers. And then the one in between was way up. So it was just, it would have been like he would have been chain smoking joints in the locker room before he went out. And then, between 10:30 and 11:50, he would have had to drink liters and liters and liters of water to get it out of his system.
Right. Doesn't make any sense. And the person from Quest, he didn't even come to the commission hearing. He was talking over the phone. Really, as you point out, couldn't really make the case for why the one test was different.
Now, here, let me explain this, because this was interesting. He was tested by SMERTL, the Smart Sports Medicine and Research Testing Laboratory, and that is used all the time in Nevada. It's a WADA-accredited lab, and it's used all the time to look for PEDs, and that's what they always use. He was tested on the middle test, the one that was positive, by Quest. Now, I've been told by people on the commission that Quest tests for drugs of abuse, street drugs, and that's their expertise. Stuff like cocaine, marijuana, things like that. Yeah. That is their expertise. Dr. Daniel Eichner from SMERTL says, hey, he admits, we are not experts at street drugs, those kind of drugs. We're experts at performance-enhancing drugs. So, you have that little caveat, but still, you look at those results, the cutoff is 150 nanograms per milliliter. So he was 48, then he went up to 730, and then he went back down to 61. So there's something wrong there. And I'm willing to say, hey, you know what? I will grant the state, the person who told me that asked me not to use his or her name, so I won't do it, but the person who told me that said, hey, Quest is the expert on street drugs. Okay, I'm willing to grant you that, but I can't just take what they say. I need evidence. Prove it. When he's saying it wasn't true, now you have to. It's up to you to prove it. And they just woefully failed to prove it. And when you don't present evidence, you can't give a guy a 5-year suspension.
And you made the good point in the article. There are several states in the United States in which smoking marijuana is legal, and we know it's not a performance-enhancing drug. So I think one of the points you made in the article was to give Silva a 1-year suspension for using performance-enhancing drugs, and then 5 for marijuana is kind of silly. Well, it was a very good story and well written, and we'll see. They're going to appeal it in court, correct?
Yeah, they have to appeal within 30 days, so that's fast coming upon us, Alan. I think they win that, and I think they win it easy, and that's going to be a precedent-changing case.
Interesting. Before I let you go, a quick comment about Floyd Mayweather and his presumed retirement from boxing after beating Berto in this last fight. Do you think he will stay out of the ring, or do you think he's coming back?
I changed my mind. Before the fight, when the fight was announced, I thought definitely he's fighting again. I didn't care what he said. I thought for sure he's fighting again. But as I saw him fight week and things behind the scenes, and I heard what he said, and listened to everything, I kind of changed, and I thought he was serious about retirement. And so I do think he's going to stay away. Now, who knows what happens in his personal life, and in 2 years from now, is there somebody that's come up that he wants to prove something to, or God forbid, does he need the money? But if that situation ever comes up, but I think as he stands here right now, I think his intention is not to come back and fight again, and certainly not to fight at the new arena in April. That's what everybody thinks, and people basically called him a liar, said he's fighting in April at the new arena, and that's that. And that's logical, but Floyd doesn't always pull the move that people think is most logical. So,
well, if he was going to do the April fight, it would mean him getting reinterested in the sport maybe quicker than he wants to be. Even though you and I both know that somewhere, wherever his spirit is, Ray Robinson is laughing at this next statement I'm going to make. But Floyd Mayweather has been more active in the last several years than he's ever been before, with only 2 fights a year, I'll grant you. But nonetheless, you get the feeling he was ready to take time off. Well, that would lead him into the ring a lot quicker than one would expect. So it's an interesting point. Now, before I let you go, though, I have to bring up one important topic. You and I have been friends for a long time and know each other, and for the most part, we have a very convivial relationship, except there are a few nights during the year when we're kind of mortal enemies in a certain way, and that is when Pittsburgh sports teams, which you have rooted for since you were a youngster, play Chicago sports teams in something that is really of note. Now, in recent years, surprisingly for both of us, our baseball teams have been very relevant. The Pirates, Pirates in recent years have become a superb team after dark period. The Cubs, who have not won a World Series since I believe Roosevelt was president, maybe before actually. And I don't mean that.
Teddy Roosevelt was president.
On October 7th, the Cubs and Pirates will play in a wild card game to see who moves on in the playoffs. It's almost locked in stone. The only question will be whether it's played in Pittsburgh or Chicago. So on that particular night, we will be on opposite sides of the fence.
One of the rare times, we got the Blackhawks and the Penguins, we got the Bears and the Steelers, and now we got the Cubs and the Pirates. And, more often than not, we trounce Chicago teams, so I'm confident again
you had to say that
will happen. But I do love your Cubs. I think Theo Epstein did a great job building that organization back up, and they have some unbelievable talents. And if you like baseball, these are going to be great playoffs.
One of the things you could say is it's a shame they have to play each other in that one-game playoff, because each of them would be leading the other divisions if they were in any of the other divisions in the National League. It just so happens that they and the Cardinals are all lumped together. And somebody made the interesting point and phrased it this way: they could be the three best teams in the National League, but even though the Mets and Dodgers are good ball clubs, but two of them will eat one, right? Because no matter who wins the wild card, one of those teams or the Cardinals will lose, and only one will move on.
Yeah, I think Kansas City had a really good record most of the year, but I think as we sit here today, 2 weeks from the playoffs, I think the four best teams in Major League Baseball are the Cardinals, the Pirates, the Cubs, and the Toronto Blue Jays. And as they're going into the playoffs, I think those are the four best teams. And you're talking maybe 1, 2, 3, or the three National League Central League teams. And
it's interesting.
As a Pirates fan, I'll just say this. This is what concerns me. Not so much this year, because they could lose this game easily. But the Pirates have a team set up that's going to be good for a couple of years. And you look at the Cubs, and the Cubs could be dynastic because they have so many of these great young players, and they have the kind of ability to have payroll that the Pirates don't have. So the Pirates, basically their team is going to be their team. They lose a couple guys, they got to find a couple bargains and bring them in, and they have some minor league players coming up. The Cubs have minor league players. They have money. So I think what Chicago fans are seeing is the tip of the iceberg. And next year, in 2017 now, I think you're going to be doing a lot of smiling.
No, they're a very good team. And one of the things that's unfair about it is, like you say, we got these three teams stacked in this division. And you could see the Cardinals are never bad. They never have to rebuild. I don't know why that is, but they never have to rebuild. So you could see this scenario playing itself out over a number of years, and we could be having the same conversation for some years. We're saying, oh my God, it's the three of the best teams in baseball. And here's the other thing. I think the one-game playoff is so unfair because anybody can lose one game. Here's the thing that gives the Cubs a little hope in this situation. The way the Cubs rotation is set up, Jake Arrieta will likely pitch that game on 4 days rest. And he's a tough guy to beat. So even though I think the Pirates, I'm going to make this admission. Right at this minute, because the Cubs are younger, I actually think the Pirates are a slightly better ball club than the Cubs.
Wow, coming from you.
No, I do think that. I think the Cubs are a terrific team. I think you made the point. Those young players haven't yet hit their stride. The Pirates have more players that are playing at their peak right now. It's not a huge difference. It's tiny, but I think they're a little better ball club. But this will demonstrate, if Arrieta pitches on 4 days rest and pitches like he's been pitching, clearly the Cubs have a very good chance of winning that game. And in a certain way, maybe a better chance than anyone might expect. And if he pitches a lights-out game, the poor Pirates are sitting there having played this wonderful season, and boom, they're gone.
Yeah, the Pirates, they clinched tonight, so the Pirates could end up winning 95, 96 games and be out after one game.
Crazy. That's and here I am. I'm sympathetic and empathetic to the Pirates. This is what's really wrong with Chicago fans. I'm feeling bad for the Pirates, and we haven't won a World Series in 108 years. Now, where's that going? What kind of idiocy is that? But anyway, we'll have fun rooting for our teams. You are a delight. Thank you for spending this time with us, Kevin. I appreciate it. I know you got a lot of stuff going on. And it's great to give boxing fans a chance to hear what you have to say.
Anytime. I appreciate being on. Thank you so much.
All right, Kevin Iole, you can see him at Yahoo Sports, read his stories. They're all excellent. And there's so much happening in the sport of boxing in the coming months that you are going to be reading a lot of great stories, a lot of great fights from Kevin, and also his MMA stories, which are terrific. So thank you to Kevin Iole, and we'll see you next time on Boxing Hangouts.